So there's a new game out, and it's pretty good, and now I'm going to talk about it. You may have seen me playing it on that other video I put out if it's still up. If not, go check it out after this one. If it's not on YouTube, it'll be on my Patreon for everyone to see, like all my videos. Anyway, here you play Goat Lady Sybil in a twisted castle on a mission to rescue a lost soul trapped in the castle. There's hints at more, but that's really all the narrative you're getting. That's fine, because that's not what you're here for. No, this game is pure 3D platforming goodness. I stumbled across this on Steam and saw the tags 3D platformer, Metroidvania, and parkour, all wrapped in a PS1 N64 art style and only $6. I had it in my library almost immediately. Let's break it down a bit. The graphics go beyond just low poly models and have options for a retro resolution scale and retro animation frame rate to really get that authentic old school look. And it works great. The first time I loaded in, I was immediately sent back in time. It's weird to feel nostalgic for a game you're playing for the first time. I remember the tutorial area thinking how it reminded me of crossing under the clock tower into Termina. The game oozes atmosphere despite its simplicity, and it just felt nice to be in. There is some room for improvement. Some areas lack decoration, but that's okay because it's to the benefit of the movement, and there are some areas where textures clip into each other. If I had any real complaints about the art style, it's that the underbelly is a little too dark. I get it's kind of the point, but it was really straining my eyes, and because there's usually multiple ways to get through an area, one playthrough I had to work backwards to get out and come back later to get the power-up that helped with lighting. Even with that power-up, it's still really dark. I get it though. This game is made in Unreal, and trying to get shadows to not be pitch black can feel like a feat in itself. Outside of that though, it was a joy to be in. A nice break from the pixel art indie games, and a breath of fresh air from the usual low poly, barely textured models that tend to blur together. It's amazing just what having a sense of style can do. Speaking of style, this game's movement is smooth. You can see in the game's own trailer all the movement abilities you'll eventually have access to, but keep in mind, it was tagged as a Metroidvania for a reason. You still have to find them yourself. Just starting out, you can jump and grab ledges, but even that on its own feels great, and it's a solid foundation to build the rest of your movement off of. It does have some other moves built in a similar way to something like Mario 64, but I found those to be limited in use. You are required to get a slide to help speed you up and move under low objects before you're out of the tutorial area, and that'll form your basic movement for a bit. It doesn't matter much because the focus is on moving through the environment smoothly, and it doesn't take long until you get your next ability. The basics are fun enough to hold until then, even when just generally searching around, and the next ability isn't too far away. By the time of my second playthrough, I got in about 15 minutes from starting. And I'm hardly a speedrunner. They would have beaten the game already. Anyway, the first ability you'll find after the slide will usually be this game's form of wall jump. Although, you can technically find the main ones in any order, I go for the wall jump first because I find it to be the most satisfying and opens up the map an incredible amount. I should point out that it's a bit unique in how it works, and that it combines it with a dash. So you jump dash, and if you hit a wall, then you can bounce off of it for more height. You can do this 3 times as soon as you get the power up, and it lets you go basically anywhere once you get the hang of it. That does have the consequence of being able to get to areas you're not supposed to be in yet. Sometimes that's good. You can move through the map more easily, taking shortcuts through areas you normally have to go around while you're exploring, and getting extra health early. Sometimes it can be a problem when you get to a part where you definitely cannot progress. You'll usually have to work harder to get there though than to access a power-up. Just keep in mind that if you find yourself struggling in an area, you're probably missing something, and there's an easier way through in a different area. Speaking of the different areas, one thing this game noticeably lacks is a map. In fact, that is the primary criticism the game has been receiving, not having a map for guidance and its seemingly non-Euclidean layout to its map design. I don't mind that layout. It's one of the things that gives that vague sense of nostalgia about the game. It is supposed to be a distorted castle after all. It wouldn't be fitting to have a simple layout. It's open-ended at the start and you can progress in basically any direction, but there is an intended order and it becomes a bit more enforced by the endgame. This is less of a problem than it sounds because your movement by then makes travel between key points quick, and there are usually ways to access them close together. If the developer does want to add a map, then there's a couple of forms it can take. There's the standard Metroidvania map that fills out as you explore, or you could add a complete map for each area that has to be found to still encourage that exploration, or even a combination of the two, where you find parts of the map for the area instead of the whole area. But if the dev doesn't want to have a map at all, then I understand. And even agree, actually. See, If the point is to keep the player moving as much as possible, then adding a map has the unfortunate consequence of encouraging the player to stop in each new room to make sure they're on the right track to their target. This can be mitigated somewhat by having the map not pause the game, but it's still effectively an interruption in the platforming. The goal is to have the player learn the environment by moving through it. Instead of a map, I think all that's needed is a bit more guidance in the rooms themselves. Areas that lead to required keys are typically marked by a symbol near the door that leads to the new area, and I think the only real requirement to fix the problem of getting lost often is to scatter similarly styled but distinct symbols around more. I remember the transition areas because they stand out. I learned the interconnected areas because I kept coming back to them. The problem really is that you usually don't spend a lot of time in most early rooms to figure out where they lead. Some designated symbols would help without interrupting the player or requiring explanation, as just being there would be enough to help separate the rooms from each other with something other than platforming challenges. Specifically, this would create little sub-areas in each major area with a persistent theme to help with guidance. This isn't exactly an easy fix, but I think it would be better than the more heavy-handed map approach. It's ultimately not a big deal to me because I find the movement fun and I like exploration and figuring out where I am. If I'm not sure where I'm going, then the best way for me to solve that is to just keep moving until I can't, and then try another route. So the consequence of not knowing where to go is to have to keep moving with the excellent movement system? Yeah, I'm okay with that. The other big standout criticism is the light combat. It's intentionally simple to mirror the era of the games it's inspired by. You have a basic 3-hit combo that can be done from the air, and your slide acts as a dodge. There is another attack where you kick your weapon at an opponent for massive damage, but that's it really. You do have the ability to heal by spending power-up built by hitting enemies, so you can recover from mistakes in combat, or from mistakes in platforming. Actually, most enemies feel like they're there to fill up your meter. There's only a few that are an actual challenge, and they are repeated pretty often as a form of pseudo-bosses, but only a few have to be fought, and most can be skipped. The combat is serviceable, and I think if there was more of a focus on it, then it would take away from the aspects that drew me to the game. I think the developer chose wisely on where they decided to focus. It does make the final boss stand out as a combat challenge. I thought for sure there would be a platforming section as a part of the boss fight, but no, it was really just combat. That's not to say you won't be using your abilities at all. The fight is way more frantic than any other you've been asked to do, so you may not realize it at first, but your movement abilities can give you a massive advantage. I also want to praise the game for teaching how to play and think about the game through gameplay. How do you learn to jump? You have to jump to get past the tutorial. How do you learn about the ledge grab? One of the jumps in the tutorial is too high to get past otherwise. Sure, the power-ups will have a pop-up to tell you the controls, but you're not expected to learn just from that, which is what I really object to. To get out of an area you got a power-up in, you'll have to use that power-up, but you won't be in a position where you take damage if you fail, so you can keep trying until you understand the mechanics. It's actually impressive how well the difficulty of the platforming ramps up based on what you've already done. If you don't try to force complex jumps, then it's a pretty smooth experience. You'll have a fairly easy time jumping around with no power-ups, then you'll get increased complexity with each one that expands your movement, until finally you have all the power-ups and can tackle the complex in-game challenges. Even then, there's nothing to the level of something like the later levels of Blue Fire. Pseudoregalia never demands perfection, simply to understand the mechanics it gives you. You'll be expected to chain your abilities, as is fitting for the endgame, but you're always given a place to rest and get your bearings during long segments of platforming. So, to sum up, Pseudoregalia is a great game. I highly recommend checking it out. Oh, and did I mention that it was made by a single person? Go and give the devs some love. This was obviously a passion project, and I love what they've done here. 3D platformers are rare enough if it wasn't evidenced by 3D fighters and VR stealth games appearing at the top of that tag. To get one this well put together is amazing, and it deserves support. No outro this time, just go play the game.